Hi, everyone. My name is Mihir Wanchu. I'm a member of Fantasy Book Critic, and today, for the first time, we have a bevy of SPFBO finalists on our panel. This is a first for Fantasy Book Critics video interview series because this is the first time we're doing like a video interview on a specific topic. This topic, why this topic was selected, and how this came to be, I'll mention in just a little bit. But today, joining me are these four wonderfully talented Grimdark authors who also coincidentally happen to be all SPFBO finalists. And so I'm gonna have them introduce themselves right now, beginning with you, Holly.
Thank you very much. I'm Holly Tinsley, HL Tinsley. I wrote the Vanguard Chronicles, books 1 and 2 are currently out. So the first book, Women of Ash and Shadow, was out a couple of years back, and The Hand That Cast the Bone came out in April this year. Thanks, Krystle. Better prepared than me as always. So yes, that's me. I write Grimdark fantasy, and I am very happy to be here with these great esteemed minds of the writing community.
Thank you, Holly. I'm pretty sure after seeing your tweet of you're going to be wisdomous. I'm really excited about that. All right, Michael, how about you go next, please?
Hi, I'm Michael R. Fletcher, author of the Obsidian Path series and some other stuff. I am actually not a Grimdark author. That is lies. I write dark fantasy, fuckers.
You live the Grimdark lifestyle, though.
What? Birthday parties with my 12-year-old balloons, and I'm so dark.
Very domesticated.
Well, thank you for that, Michael. And yes, that is indeed a sign of a Grimdark author who has to attend the birthday parties and all of that, with balloons, cake, and everything. So thank you so much for that. Next, on to you, Sir Clayton.
Yeah, I'm Clayton Snyder. I'm author of Blackthorn most recently and co-author in Risk of Groans. And I'm incredibly boring most of the time. So, oh, thank you, Krystle.
You're welcome. I have Blackstone Heart too, but it's too high up. So you're out of luck, Fletcher.
We seem to have really humble authors, but thank you so much, Clayton, and welcome. And last but never the least, Krystle.
Hi, I'm Krystle Matar. I also am very domesticated, but I write Grimdark. My book, The Legacy of the Brightwash, is Mihir has it, and it's also behind Fletcher's head. So I don't think I need to hold up my copy. Yeah, and we were all in SPFBO together at the same time, and we're all still alive. So nobody was killed that year.
Well,
in spite of the threats that
year.
Fletcher made.
That was, I actually didn't think of that because I somehow in my mind, Michael was like, I was counting Michael for, as his previous finalist. Yeah, the Black.
All by himself.
Yes. I forgot about that Michael had co-authored Norulska Groans, and that's correct, Krystle. You were all finalists at the same time. That is a funny coincidence. I didn't really think of that. Anyways, that shows how much prepared I am.
You're in good company.
Great. That's just wonderful to hear. And so the topic for today, which I wanted, which I was so happy that you all four agreed to generously to contribute your time and your opinions today, is about trigger warnings, and especially in vis-a-vis in context of grimdark fantasy or dark fantasy. Now, the reason for this topic and how it all came together is actually all thanks to Michael R. Fletcher. He one day, I actually remember on Facebook, I don't know which forum it was or whether it was on his own wall, he basically had opened this topic up, or he had started a conversation about are trigger warnings really needed in Grimdark? Or somebody had posted something and then he volunteered his opinion. And there was like a deluge of opinions.
A mistake.
I know,
Always
but it was, but thankfully it led to me have this idea of like, why don't I get the authors together and have them talk more? Because as always, Facebook opinions get wild and they get pretty contentious, and as was the case over there. Michael, kudos to you for basically even continuing on in a very polite manner, because believe me, those replies I didn't feel like they would needed to be polite, replied to back politely, but still kudos on doing that. Sorry, Krystle, you're going to say something?
Oh no, I must have missed it, and it sounds like I'm really glad that I missed it, because
It was going on for 2 to 3 days, if I'm not wrong, because I kept on seeing notifications come over and over again, and there were bloggers in it, there were authors in it, there were, of course, the general public, because I still do not remember which, and I tried searching it up, Michael, as well. I think it got deleted at either the original post creator got either deleted or it must have been just locked up because I could not find that post where it was.
Yeah, I think, wasn't that in the Grimdark readers and writers group?
I want to see, that was my first place where I searched for it, but I did not find it over there as well. But that's the likely thing which basically led to, me having this, not so original idea of asking you all about what you all thought about the need for trigger warnings, or even the concept of trigger warnings, but only vis-a-vis Grimdark Fantasy. For our viewers, basically, I think almost everybody has heard of, or at least knows what trigger warnings are, but just for those who might not know, the definition given, according to Merriam-Webster or Google, is basically a trigger warning is a statement at the start of a piece of writing, video, or any content material that is alerting or cautioning the reader or the viewer to the fact that it contains potentially distressing material. They don't really define what that distressing material is. There's a bit more description about trigger warnings, which basically saying that they arose out of the psychological concept of post-traumatic stress disorder, vis-a-vis triggers, that is, again, experiences or events that cause a trauma survivor to re-experience an incident, go into avoidance mode, or numb out. Basically, this theory kind of was evoked via the Vietnam War. Trigger warnings kind of basically came much more into the picture in the late 2000s and early 2010s via literature, as is defined by Sarah Seltzer. Now, since we got that definition and the basic fundamentals of why trigger warnings exist out of the picture, I want to open this to all you Grimdark authors who have been writing in these really dark, supposedly dark, grimdark even, pieces and books. Do you all think that trigger warnings can have a place or should be there in grimdark fiction or dark fantasy? And I'm going to open it up with Holly, please.
Oh, thanks so much.
No pressure, Holly.
I love the way the whole concept of this thing is basically Fletcher started a fire on Twitter and now we're just going to throw gasoline on it. No, I mean, to be fair, in all seriousness, I thought about this all prior to coming on here today. And the fact is, like, my thoughts about trigger warnings are completely contradictory. So do I see a necessity for trigger warnings? Yes, I do, in some contexts, especially in context of things like Grimdark. Do I like them? No, absolutely not. I don't like them at all, just to be completely and utterly genuine and transparent. I think, for me, trigger warnings are a greater conversation than just, should there be a warning saying this book contains XYZ, which could possibly be traumatic to read. It goes deeper than that. So I think, yes, there's an argument for why they should exist. I think they're important for people. I think they're necessary for people. Do I necessarily use them myself? No, not in the kind of way that you're describing them.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. Michael, since you're the progenitor of this entire thing.
Yeah, I much like Holly, I'm torn on this. So on the one hand, I have no problem. Like if a writer wants to include a list of trigger warnings, cool, go for it. That doesn't bother me at all. Telling writers that they have to or should, that pisses me off. Personally, I never will. But even that, I'm kind of I'm a little on the fence on. Not, I won't. I will never include them, but I get it. I'm not the kind of person, therefore, I'm never going to read anything and be like so upset that it's going to be traumatizing to me. It's just never going to happen. If I read a scene in a book where I'm like, "Ooh, fuck, that's nasty," like say something Clayton wrote, I will just stop reading it. Or skip it if I'm enjoying the rest of the book. Like I'm an adult, I have that power. I don't have to sort of keep plowing into it. But that's me, and I'm not the person these trigger warnings are for. I don't know. Like I said, I personally I write what I would call adult fantasy, dark fantasy books for grownups. If I had to list every shitty thing that happened in one of my books that might upset someone, it doubled the length of my book.
Fair point, Michael. Thank you. Clayton, what do you think?
Yeah, like the others, I'm of two minds. I think they do have a use, and I don't I don't know that I'm ever going to actually include them in my own books. And I think that's, what it boils down to is with a lot of fantasy or with a lot of literature, you don't necessarily know what you're getting, but with especially Grimdark, it is what it says on the can. So it's kind of, again, I can see the use of them. I can see the sensitivity needed in addressing other people's trauma, but at the same time, it's not something that I'm going to add to my books for the simple reason is if you know what I write, you know what's coming up. Yeah.
Clayton Snyder on the front of the book. That's your trigger warning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If Mike recoils and makes a weird sound, then I know I'm doing my job. So
that is an excellent thing. And Krystle, what about you?
I guess I'm the dissenting stance because I added them to Brightwash. So where do I start? My roots in this come from not knowing what Grimdark was before I hit the market. And so my biggest argument with the argument that people who are reading Grimdark should know what they're getting into is that implies that people know which books are Grimdark and which books aren't. And since we as authors have such a hard time defining that ourselves, also the readers have a hard time defining it. And because of that, Grimdark gets kind of a bad rap about being, trauma porn and rape fantasies and stuff, and there's more to us than that, and so I feel like there's room for some conversation about what we're trying to achieve, and so I didn't label it a trigger warning. I just put an author's note in the beginning of Brightwash saying that I was going to deal with I have to open it and check now because obviously I couldn't list everything, but mostly it's just mentioning child abuse and body horror. I can't remember what all it said. Oh, miscarriage, drug addiction. So I wanted people to know that I came into these themes on purpose because I had something to say, and I'm not here to shock for fun, which is kind of the reputation we get as authors. And some people are doing that and they're killing it and it's great, but there's more to us than that. And so that gives me an in to letting people know that I'm taking it seriously. I know it's heavy, and I'm kind of making a promise that I'm going to respect other people's boundaries. And if they don't want to come with me on this book that talks very heavily about miscarriage, Godspeed. You weren't ever going to be my audience, and that's fine. And so it seems to be a lot of the resistance to trigger warnings as well. People should know what they're getting into, but people just coming into certain online communities don't know. So why not just put the one page of just a little bit of something? And I want to give the caveat that everything that I'm saying is what I've considered for myself, and I don't expect anyone to follow me. It's just this is how I've decided to comport myself in this community, and I'm probably gonna continue doing it because it gets worse from here.
No, thank you so much for that viewpoint, Krystle.
Thanks for making us look bad.
Well, I told you. You said you were going to be an asshole.
People.
You and your
said you were going to be an
well-reasoned arguments.
asshole, and I said I was going to be excessively sensitive, and we would cancel each other out, and then Clayton and Holly will carry the day.
Okay.
No, that's a very well valid point, and I see the theme between especially even what I'll come to you, Krystle, but especially with Holly, Michael, and Clayton said, they're not disrespecting the readers. They're not they're not saying that absolutely
No.
don't. They also, all of them see a necessity for it. You, Krystle, have kind of put it a little bit more eloquently, because you kind of had that. You even were so nice enough to even include the fact that in your author's note I see the part that you have included, that Canadian English Convention spelling and grammar
Oh,
we
I
used for
took
this
that
book.
out. Yeah, I took that out to make room for the content warning because I didn't realize Brightwash was dark when
Mhm.
I published it, and then people came back to me and let me know, like, hey, this is a heavy book. So then I took out the Canadian English warning and put in the author's note instead, and I could try to take a picture of it or something, but it's basically just I hit the biggest points. I can't possibly hit everything, and if that's not for you, then it's not, no hard feelings, but this isn't the world for you.
That's a very valid point. Clayton, and this is maybe it's more so open for all three of you, Clayton, Holly, and Michael, because you kind of all had the same trend of that you personally you agree with it, or you see that there is a need for it, or at least some people might find it useful, but you all don't necessarily feel that it's going to be there. It doesn't necessarily need to be there as part of your book, or ideally you won't be using it for any of your books in the future as well. Why is that?
I mean, just to jump in, I would say, in terms of using trigger warnings, I think it goes beyond just using it in the book personally. So I don't specifically have a list, like Krystle has in her book of themes, for example, but anywhere that my book is available, so Amazon, my website, things like that, they do have kind of an explanation of what type of book it is, what to expect, that there are scenes in it that some people would find traumatic, in a less specified way than how Krystle has, for example, but it is there. And what I kind of like about that myself is that initiates conversations then with people, and I'm not saying that it's the reader's responsibility to ask an author what's in their book, not by any stretch.
But they can ask each other too.
But they can, yeah, that's it, exactly.
And that's
those
something,
conversations happen.
That's something that I noticed for Brightwash. It was up for a buddy read on a server, and somebody noticed the mention of miscarriage, and she wanted more information. So I stayed out of it, but I watched them talk about in what way, like, is it depicted, is it, and so it gives them the opportunity, the language, to talk to each other about where those borders are going to be. And I think that is because we want people who like the book to read the book. So
we want everyone to buy it, but we only want the people who are going to like it to actually read it.
Exactly. And leave really nice reviews.
Just don't read it if you don't like dark fantasy. Just put it on a bookcase and ignore it, whatever.
It's got such a nice cover.
Buy it, hopefully read it, and if you like it, review it, and then post that review as well.
Yeah.
Clayton, Michael, anything else to add about your personal views about why you would ideally say that you'd never want to have trigger warnings, in spite of what you all write? And I completely realize that and recognize that you both write some really dark and stuff.
They have a particular reputation that precedes them, so I feel like in their case it's
completely undeserved, though. There's a level at which I think I'm caught between generations. I'm a little bit older than all of you. And so and I'm aware of it. There is an annoyance with coddling people and making everything so fucking safe that pisses me off. And at the same time, I would like to be a better person than that, than this sort of cold, fucking grow up. Yes, their shit happens in the book. Read it, deal with it. But that's also a shitty sort of a shitty way to approach things. Like, we can be better to each other. But I'm still caught in that, no, I don't want to put trigger warnings in the book. If I write a scene that kind of shocks you, well, guess what? That's what I was fucking trying to do. Yeah. For hopefully a reason rather than just shock value, because that's kind of boring. But you start off and you're like, here are all the exciting, dark, crazy things that are going to happen in this book. You're like, cool. Okay, why bother reading the rest of it?
Yeah, I think part of it for me is that like Mike had mentioned, I don't write for shock. I write to make a point, and putting those warnings up front kind of robs the strength of that point. It doesn't hit you in the gut as hard. It doesn't knock you out of your senses and make you think about things. Why does this happen, or why do we do this to each other? And it's just it's again, I see why somebody might want to be warned about those things, but I also feel like it robs the strength of the message when you're just dropping it into the beginning of the book and, hey, this is everything that happens, and oh, okay, well, I know what to look for now, and it's not going to affect me in any way. And that may not be true. If granted, if they skip it or whatever, then they're definitely missing out on some of the message of the book too. So.
No, this is actually great, because both of you brought this wonderful point about, like, those trigger warnings can potentially exist as spoilers. Now, I know, Krystle, you kind of brought this up as well, that that you didn't really put trigger warnings, but you put content warnings. And this is another question open to all four of you. With the advent of these trigger warnings, can they go in the territory of spoilers? Because that's, you're kind of like highlighting the worst aspects supposedly of the book, or the most triggering aspects. What do you all think about that? Like, is it really necessary to spell everything out beforehand? And how would you, and where would you draw the line about what is potentially spoilers or what is not spoilers with vis-a-vis trigger warnings?
Yeah, that is why I kept it with really vague language, because there is an awareness of, like, the back of the book is supposed to do a certain job, and then, but I took kind of my list off of things that people were flagging in their Goodreads reviews, just like the things that they mentioned that kind of changed the weight of things for them. But I tried to keep it vague for that reason, because it's like it's thematic, so it's harder to get down into details without having unrolling a big long list. So I do see why some people worry about putting the balance of their impact off kilter with a big list of, especially because I noticed the horror genre has the same argument on a regular basis of how much do we explain ourselves, and how much do we let people come in blind? And I don't have an answer. I'm just
with Grimdark, at least you can go, it is such a weird little tiny subgenre.
Yeah,
you can go like, maybe not everyone has heard of it, and that's totally fair enough, totally true. But horror, like, no one's gonna be like, horror, what's a horror book? Oh shit, it's horrible, there's horrible stuff happening.
People have died in this book, that's awful.
That's crazy. Why wasn't I warned? Like, so trigger warnings in a horror book makes even less sense to me than trigger warnings in a grimdark novel.
In fantasy, that's where the balance becomes weird, because fantasy does deal with themes of death and assault quite a lot, but in some subgenres, the weight of it is much lighter, and it's not so confronting as we do. And so that's why I do wonder about, if people don't know our reputation and people don't know what we're doing in the subgenre, should we give them a little heads up that it's not going to be hope punk?
I'll come to you, Krystle. I want to let Holly and Clayton talk about this. I'll come back to this fascinating point which you have brought up as well. Holly, Clayton, sorry, and Michael as well. Michael, I'm looking forward to your next Facebook post about trigger warnings in horror, by the way. But please, sorry.
I just kind of go on back to our trigger warning spoilers. So I'm going to kind of come at this now from a more personal point of view. So I will apologize in advance, because this is something that kind of my brain and my mouth don't really cooperate with the subject, so it might not make sense. But as a reader, particularly, because I am somebody who has dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder, and through that have gone through kind of different forms of therapy and conversations and things about a lot of the subjects that we touch on, I think there's an important distinction that for some people like myself, It's not the fact that trigger warnings are a spoiler, it's the fact that sometimes the trigger warning in itself can be more of a trigger than the actual topic it's talking about. So, for example, if I read a book and from the first page it says to me, right, you're going to read about, you know, for example, Krystle talks about miscarriage, you know, just as an example, that's already my head's going to be thinking, okay, is this going to be well handled? Where's it going to come in? How is it going to affect me? Whereas I would actually prefer to read a book that tackles that topic, but does it in a way that is sensitively done, well handled, appropriate, responsible. And then those kind of triggers are not as impactful to me, because I then I understand the context of the world. I understand why that's been included. And this is probably something that only affects a very small amount of readers, but, you know, I have to also think about the fact if I feel this way about it, there's a potential that other people might feel this way about it. So, you know, for me, whether trigger warnings spoil the book is not really an issue. And I'm going to stop talking there because now my brain and my mouth have stopped cooperating and I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. So I apologize, that is a hard subject for me to go into, but I hope that was kind of made sense.
No, it does, because Holly, if I'm not wrong, what you're basically implying is that the trigger warnings themselves can be triggers for people as well. You know, just knowing that there's something in this, again, for the type of reader who is potentially the lookout for them, that they might even choose not to read that book. And this kind of goes back to the themes point, which both Clayton and Michael had made, that, you know, there's most authors have certain themes in mind. They write in a certain way so that they're hoping that the reader will come to a conclusion, and they leave the conclusion up to the reader as well. Is that what you were kind of getting at as well, Holly?
I think in a nutshell, what I'm getting at is that trigger warnings, you know, they can be obviously good for people, but I think there are some people who require exposure, some people require aversion. I'm somebody who requires exposure to things. So if I'm, you know, reading a book and it's going to expose me to subjects that might be difficult, as long as it's done in a way that is brought in gradually with a plot that makes sense and a kind of a relevance to it, then that traumatizes me less than a badly written trauma plot that has got a list at the beginning of it. Again, don't know how much sense I'm making, but I'm doing my best here.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Clayton, Michael, Krystle, any thoughts?
Yeah, I see what Holly's saying, where it's like, yes, the list is there, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be handled in a way that even works. Where so now it's just a list of trauma points, and then but there's no answer as to whether or not, you know, is this thing that's being talked about something there? Again, like, who's to stop people from putting it in for shock value and then saying it's there for shock value? So it's not so much of a warning as it is like a big assembled list of all the ways that this person can let you down.
I remember back in the 80s, science fiction author Martin Caidin, I think it was, can't remember the name of the book, and he had just like way out there graphic violent sex scenes and violent scenes, like in this sort of science fiction book. And the way the publisher handled it was there'd be a like pause and a warning, you know, graphic scene coming up involving cats and sex, you know, and whatever weirdness. And you're like, if you don't want to read this, you can skip ahead now to page so-and-so and keep reading.
Which must make
and
it
was
worse,
like,
because it's like,
what the fuck? Like, what a like clumsy way of handling that. But it was obviously like a marketing gimmick, because it was like right on the cover, they're telling you this is so over the top graphic. We've sort of like, we'll point out every time something really bad's going to happen so that you don't have to read it. But like, if you bought the book, you know, in the 80s, yeah,
back when books were still cheap.
Yeah.
So Mike, Clayton, I didn't want to skip over you, but would you like to add anything to these points that, you know, both Holly and Krystle brought up?
Yeah, I think you know, like Krystle had mentioned, as long as there's somewhat of a vague maturity warning, I guess I'm okay with that. You know, this book contains graphic scenes, whatever. I think I'm comfortable with that. But you know, as Holly had mentioned, a big list of trigger warnings for me. There's two problems with it. One is, yeah, it can be definitely anxiety inducing if you've gone through those things and all of a sudden, oh, hey, this happens. And now I got to be stressed out the entire time if I decide to read it, because I don't know when that's going to hit me in the face. And two is, where do you really draw the line? I've seen content warnings for like seafood, and I don't know, you know, at what point is that kind of over the top?
Dude, seafood upsets the shit out of me.
Not a big fan of squid.
Wait, is that real? Like, is there a trigger warning for a seafood?
I had seen it once before, and I don't recall where, but yes.
Oh, geez. Okay, wow.
Yeah, there's some places where you could go that it'll list all the things that people might want a trigger warning for, and is I don't want to sound insensitive, but it goes a little far, and it is a weird line where it's like how much, if we decide that we do want to, how much can we cater to people without just kind of writing a chapter by chapter summary of everything that might be upsetting. Snakes and spiders and bones, and that's some of the stuff that I saw on, and I feel like while I understand there's a lot of people dealing with anxiety that, or burdens that for them are very hard to carry, there's a point where that much safety guard becomes untenable, in my opinion. And I have easily demonstrated that I am the most sensitive of the Grimdark authors, but there is a little part of me that's a little bit Gen X, like our good friends Clayton and Michael, where it's like there is a point where it's like you have to guard your own space, and there's only so much an author can do, because for all we know, I know certainly in my situation, the reason my writing got to be what it is because I am also processing my own traumas and my own burdens, and so I'm aware of where the sharp edges of that are, and I don't want to hurt people by accident, but I'm trying to hurt people a little bit on purpose. And so there's a point where if that's not your jam, it's time to find another author. And so how does that meet? And there is a point where it's not realistic, in my opinion.
Well, it's funny you bring up the generation thing, because I think Gen X was really raised on trauma. I mean, between Stephen King and movies like, hey kids, watch Chucky, there's a lot of it there, and we were never given those safety rails. And
yeah, I am a millennial. I'm a millennial by birth age, but I was raised latchkey kid watching horror movies and war movies when I was like way too young. And so it's like I kind of live between the both, but I'm more on the sensitive side than Fletcher is. But it's a weird dynamic to live with in your own head, where it's like, I can grow up, but no, wait, I'm sorry, I don't want to hurt you. So
yeah.
It is a weird conversation to have, and I don't think there's going to be any one right answer, because we all process our problems differently,
yeah.
And we've all got way different types of baggage to deal with.
Super fluffy, no baggage. Everything is grand.
Just unicorns and
trauma. Nothing bothers me. I am fine. It's all fine here. It's fine.
I have you in some podcast somewhere admitting that you cried reading my book, so I call bullshit.
No, coming back to this point, sorry, which kind of, which Michael, talked about, and Krystle, with the whole thing about guardrails, and again, this is another point which Holly kind of mentioned as well. This would you all consider this need for trigger warnings, to be infantilizing, for people's opinion? Because like Michael mentioned, like in the 80s, that maybe that publisher thing purposely put that as just like a marketing ploy, just to kind of grab readers' eyeballs, like what is really in this book. But even if, let's take it, if you're thinking about it from a serious viewpoint, like that this is there, and that you have these trigger warnings which are maybe pages long as well. Do you all think that it is treating readers as if they're made of glass, that it is necessary that, that we need to treat everyone, that they might have untold amounts of trauma, because again, we don't know which readers will pick up our book. We don't know what lives they've gone through, in what part of the world that they're living in. Is it fair to make that statement that it can be infantilizing to people?
I think there's a fine line there. The stuff that's actually trauma inducing is probably safe to say, yeah, this talk about that. And then the stuff that gets further down the line, as Krystle had mentioned, there's bones and skulls and snakes and so on. I think maybe then we're kind of trotting over that line and butting ourselves into their lives. Just as we've got to trust the reader at some point, and they've got to trust us to tell the story. So yeah, I think it's a very fine line to walk. Okay, that's a good answer.
And I think that's where the genre specifically, it starts to get a little bit, because fantasy is so famously an escapist genre. And so when we're over here in the Grimdark playground, we're not offering an escape. Well, maybe we are. Maybe it's not as bad as their real lives. But I think if they're coming to Grimdark for comfort, then they're tempered glass now. Like they've got it. But that's where I feel like our strange niche kind of requires just a little bit more warning, just because fantasy tends to be more hopeful than maybe the worlds that we're writing. And so if somebody comes in not knowing what Grimdark is, I don't want to traumatize them by accident. All the trauma is on purpose.
Holly, Michael, your thoughts?
I'd say, go on.
Yeah, it's fiction, it's fantasy. I mean, and I, as I said before, like, I'm just not the person trigger warnings are for. So it's really difficult for me to sort of talk about that and approach that from a sort of a probably more reasoned, angle. Like I see it and I'm like, it's a fantasy novel. Like, really, you're going to be upset by fiction? Like, you better not watch any movies, but it's like, at the same time, wouldn't it be nice if we could be better? And so, I mean, movies, at least you get like a rating, like, oh, it's restricted. You don't get trigger warnings, but you can
they have them now.
Oh, do they?
Yeah. When you well, I don't know how the theaters are handling it, but when you do it on Netflix and you go, you can see the rating. They'll give you a list of the things that made them rate it at that level. So, which is kind of how I wanted to handle it. Like I have such a hard time with the ratings, because on the one hand it feels like gatekeeping a little bit, but then on the other hand it just feels like such an easy way to just like slap on an identifier that will make it obvious that we're rated R. So that's a good comparison to me, to my thinking, that movies have ratings, and something like a content warning could eventually morph into a similar concept.
I actually have a question about that as well, and I'll get to that. That's for a little bit later part as well. Holly, I didn't. You were also saying something.
I told you I never cut in.
I mean, I was going to make some really good, intelligent, wisdomous points there, and then Michael and Krystle stole them all. So then I had to think of something else. But while we're kind of on the subject of kind of the extent of content warning as well, one thing that I would like to point out, because I'm sure, again, if this has happened to me, it's probably happened to other readers as well. I have actually yet to find any book with a trigger warning list that actually lists my triggers specifically, because they are so niche and so specific. And also, they are not things that would necessarily trigger anyone else. In fact, the complete opposite. A lot of my triggers are things that other people, you know, probably really like to have in their life. So there's almost like a little element of me as well that feels like going too far into it is like saying, okay, so we're going to list all these traumas that we can think of, but we're going to completely exclude all these other people who have got traumas because we're going to stop at this point. So I think for me, keeping it that generic, similar to how, you know, the kind of movies used to work, where it'd be like, this has got, you know, violence and sex and drugs and, you know, all sorts of evil things going on. I think going too specified, you're actually making it more likely that you're going to exclude other people at that point.
No, actually that's a fascinating point, and I'll shut up if anybody else wants to jump in, because it kind of leads to my next question as well. No, okay. I was going to ask that, you know, can an author ever be responsible for knowing readers' triggers, right? Because especially they don't know who's going to pick up their books. They don't even know, you know, where they're from or why they're picking up their books. So in this regard, actually, Holly, the point that you brought up, like, you know, that to list all the triggers, you are kind of excluding people. Are authors, or can authors be ever expected to know potentially what might be triggering about their book to what, you know, which people as well?
Yeah, I think Holly nailed it when it's not possible. It's not possible to know the depth and breadth at which we can damage each other. If I didn't even know my book was dark, like, how am I going to know which things would, you know, we're too varied to possibly get to a point where we could know for sure.
Holly, Michael, Clayton.
Clayton, take it away. Go. Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Holly, go. You go. Somebody.
You know, I was just thinking about, probably not completely related, but I was thinking about how people will flock to a PG-13 movie and they'll just watch rows and rows of goons get mowed down for like 2 hours straight. Just death nonstop and smoke and fire and war.
But there's no blood, so it's not rated R.
Exactly. And then they'll walk into a book and kind of have problems with the content of the book, but they've just watched, you know, the Avengers Part 45. And it's an odd dichotomy. It doesn't, a lot of it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So.
Fair point. Holly, I think you were also going to say something before.
I was, but I forgot what it was, so come back to me.
Okay, Michael, you're up next then.
Jesus. Actually, I got sidetracked when you started talking about, can authors know what readers are going to, you know, and I still find it weird that anyone's reading my books. So I can't imagine trying to figure out what's going to upset them. I'm just like, really? Somebody bought my book? That's weird. I haven't quite got past that stage yet. So
aren't you on full-time income now?
Yeah, I know, it's weird. I'm still not ready for it though. I mailed a box of books to Israel the other day.
Oh, cool.
Oh, wow. Kudos.
So weird. Like somebody in Israel someday. About 3 months from now when the ship arrives.
Okay.
I remembered what I was going to say now.
Oh, yay.
It popped back in there. So in terms of, you know, can authors know all things that are going to traumatize a person? No, they can't. I think this is where that bigger conversation comes into play, and this is the point where we start involving readers and bloggers and reviewers, and you know, having people actually discuss the book, because I think even just by mistake, just by mentioning something in the book, somebody can alert someone else to, you know, okay, well, we're going to approach this subject, or we're going to explore this topic in it. So, you know, I think readers and bloggers and reviewers kind of have a massive role to play in that as well.
There's word of mouth too, like you were mentioning. The first book that pops into my mind is the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. And when I read it, there wasn't any word of mouth about that book. There were no reviews. So you got hit full in the face with what happens in that book. And nowadays, if somebody mentions those books, there's always that caveat from somebody else who's read them that says, hey, there's some pretty stuff that happens here. You might not want to read it, or you might want to skip over that section. So it's so odd. This is all new to people like me who have read books where just the worst stuff happens, and we dealt with it because you didn't have a choice. Nobody was there to tell us, hey, this is awful. So,
But Mahir,
Yes, sir.
what's your stance? Where are you on this? I mean, as a reviewer here. So what do you think about trigger warnings? What do you think about writers including them? What's your gut feel on all this?
I was trying not to have any opinion because I was going to let you folks speak all the opinions. But me personally, I don't care. I will read anything. I will read the most horrific things as well, because I can. For me, maybe I am privileged enough not to have experienced trauma. I'll put it that way. So I can read that stuff and it doesn't affect me. With that being said, though, in fiction, generally, I feel that, if people want to include trigger warnings, they can, if they wish to. Grimdark, again, it's a little bit tricky, right? And like you mentioned with horror, why would you include certain things about the book which are inherently a part of the genre? So if people are coming to the genre as a reader, I feel like you should be informed enough, or at least if not informed enough, you should be expecting that Grimdark will be dark. And the darkness will be left up to the author to interpret as to what they want to include. Because even amidst this panel, we have somebody like Holly who writes really low fantasy, but the darkness of the world is prevalent. Then we have you, Michael. You write about gods and cannibals and everything. Clayton writes the most cringe-inducing, horrific torture scenes, but they are good because they make sense in that world. And Krystle writes about people falling in love, again, set in a world where there's something akin to slavery is present, and yet it makes sense in that world. So I don't see a difference between all of that, but I can see why somebody who perhaps might get really horrified at what is being done in those books. So, like I said, I'm just a reader. I'm here to hear your opinions and not provide mine.
Yeah, but you're a reviewer as well. I mean, you read probably more books than all of us combined.
Yeah.
But I have actually, besides Krystle's books, I've never actually come across any trigger warnings so far right now, until now. But I also don't read YA because I've heard that YA has actually nowadays the most amount of trigger warnings in books. So maybe that genre needs to have, or maybe it doesn't. Actually, never mind.
Can I ask a question with that though?
Yes, please.
Just because obviously, talking about trigger warnings, and you've said, you've not come across many trigger warnings. Is that again potentially because the content warnings or the explanation of the book is not actually within the book itself, but within the marketing around the book? So on Amazon and Goodreads and places like that.
So maybe you're taking it in subconsciously, which I think is a good way to handle it as well, just where you kind of try to be proactive about who you're marketing to and how you shape the marketing, just to let people know it's going to be a rough ride.
Marketing?
right.
Yeah, well, see, when we go and yell at each other about Barry on Twitter, that is technically marketing. And in fact, when you and I dork around, I sell more books.
This exact thing happens to me every time me and Krystle have a conversation on Twitter. I sell books. It's amazing.
Yeah, just being visible, that's marketing. Yeah. So you're doing great, Fletcher.
Okay, awesome.
Holly, you actually you're kind of spoiling all my questions, because honestly, all the things that you point to.
I'll be quiet, sorry.
No. This is a good thing, because it kind of gives me a reason to go to that question. Because actually, this point which you brought up, like the marketing point and the need for maybe the author or publisher to kind of put like a trigger warning or some content warning. That was actually going to be one of my questions, and I'll just bring it up on all of you right now. What happens, like if trigger warnings remain mandatory not by the publisher, because I know you all are self-published, but let's say by Amazon or Barnes and Nobles or whichever front store that you were wanting to sell your store in. Like if they told you, like, okay, because I'm pretty sure when you authors have to upload books, you have to upload its metadata as well, right? What if trigger or content warnings were made necessary by those not publishers, but I think both
The sellers.
the booksellers, yes,
Yeah.
the selling companies like Amazon or anything like that. What would your thoughts be then, and how would you?
It'd be hard to enforce. I mean, they'd basically have to read the book to decide whether or not we got the right ones. And if they're going to read it, then they can just put the trigger warnings themselves. I'd
Well-
probably slack off and be like, this book is written for adults. There's your trigger warning. I'm done. But again, that's not super
super nice.
super nice. That's not how Krystle would handle it. And she is the sun source of weaponized positivity we must try and live up to.
Yeah, sadly, even if it wasn't enforceable, I think sadly at the end of the day, we still need to make money. We still need to sell the books in order to eat and pay bills and do whatever else we need to do. So if it's a thing that happens, you really don't have much of a choice other than not writing anymore. You
could
I
make a
feel like-
really gloriously shocking and appalling list of trigger item. Make the reading of the trigger items itself triggering. You're like, and if you got through that, you should definitely read the book.
which maybe I should no, which book was it? It was Obsidian Psalm, wasn't it, where there was the floating
the floating
oysters. Okay, all right. Oysters, prairie oysters.
Yep. No,
That would be an interesting. Was that Obsidian Psalm?
that was that book.
That would make one day you'll have to sit down and just write the trigger warnings for that book as a joke.
Oh, that book. That would be another book in itself.
Clayton, I get blown up in one of your books, right? If I'm not wrong, I don't remember which one it is. It's one of the River of Thieves ones that I get blown up in.
Yeah, I think it's
The first one?
the first one when they come off the docks.
Yes.
Is that the spider?
Technically, you explode yourself. So
Yes. Because I'm thinking about something. The character is thinking about something or what the word is or what it's called, and then I explode if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
That, sir, was trigger inducing to me. How dare you?
But that's how we show our affection, Mahir.
Right.
It means he
Why
really
not?
likes you.
I'm kidding. I don't. He was
Which
kind enough.
should be a trigger in itself. Warning. These are the people Clayton likes. Good luck.
I'm glad he likes me, but I'm glad he doesn't like me as much as he loves Dirk Ashton, because after what he did to Dirk Ashton, or both of them did to Dirk Ashton in Norolska Groans, I must say that I'm horrified for Dirk, but he seems to be happy about it, so yay for him.
I'm trying to think about how many people I've tuckerized in my books, and I think I'm up to about 6 or 7 right now. So
I think it was End of Sorrow that Fletcher, you tuckerized me, and my husband found it. He read all 3 of those books. He loves them, and he found it. And he said, "Hey, he killed you. Does that mean he's mad at you?" I was like, "No, it means he really likes me."
Fletcher also was kind enough to make me a demon sword, so that was pretty cool as well. Holly, subtle coercion for you, since you're writing your 3rd book, it would be nice to find somebody named me here in that book of yours.
Okay, yes, my mind already, as soon as this conversation happened, my mind started going. I was like, okay, yeah, there's ideas formulating there. I can't promise you'll like them, but there's ideas formulating.
That's okay.
Plus, I can guarantee you won't like them.
That's absolutely okay. I'm always thrilled to find some poor character named me here in the book getting killed or blown up, or finding them.
You're gonna make a note?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I actually want to pull us back to something that both Krystle and Holly, you both
Stay on
referred to.
topic.
Somebody has to. That you both brought up this fascinating point that that readers actually talk to each other, and sometimes they can come up or they can inform each other with trigger warnings. To Clayton's point, that when he read the state Lord, was it Lord Fallsbane, or whichever the first book of the Covenant of the book was by Stephen Donaldson, that there were no readers, that there was nobody to inform each other. But if an author decides not to use trigger warnings, but the readers do so in the reviews, isn't that lack of communication from the authorial perspective about their business product or their book. And also, as a extension, you can, one can never control what, or what, like basically what trigger warning that the reader might slap on, which might be correct or might be completely incorrect. What do you all think about that, or thoughts? And Holly, I would love for you to go ahead with this one.
I mean, I kind of had this happen with the first book because obviously it was kind of before I was really aware of the extent of like what Grimdark was, and that's what the book I was writing was. So again, I didn't really have that reference point. But I can just hear random voices. I don't know what's going on.
Oh, that's
it's the voices in my
Chris.
head. So yeah, the first book, when I was reading some of the reviews that had got put onto Goodreads, there was some with trigger warnings, and it really shocked me and took me back that somebody had put a trigger warning for rape onto the first book, because it hadn't really occurred to me that was or could be a requirement, because there is no rape in my book. I don't include it. It's one of my rules. I will never include it in any book. However, the word is used to reference the world and the fact that this is something that happens and something that exists. So it's not on page, it's not, there's no scene of it or anything like that. So it really hadn't occurred to me that somebody would require a trigger warning for that, just for the use of it as a reference. So that was something I had to kind of take on board. And again, that goes back to the whole, can we really know the extent to which we need to put these things in? If you have a character who is mentioning something in the context of a conversation about the world, or things that can or might happen, does that in itself explicitly require a trigger warning? So I think there's a rabbit hole that you can go down really easily here.
Yeah. As writers, we have no control over reviews.
No, and nor
that's
should we.
just it. Like, no, and it's weird to get used to that. Like I remember sending a reviewer, I think it was Blackstone Heart, one of my books, and they liked it and all, but the review was just laid out the plot and like spoilers all over the place, and it's like, fuck, and it's just nothing you can do about it except for not send that reviewer your books anymore.
Well, but some people
if
like
they want to
that.
list spoilers or trigger warnings, people are going to do that, and that's just, there's nothing we can do about it, and nor should we actually have any sort of, like Krystle said, any input on what reviewers want to talk about. You just kind of, for me, like I killed my Goodreads account altogether. I don't go there anymore. I don't read reviews. I don't look at Amazon. That way lies madness.
And you're already mad enough.
I'm much happier not knowing. I can look at book sales and be like, okay, somebody must like it. They're buying it. So like word of mouth must be spreading. So it's okay. And then, but I don't need to hear somebody like bitch about, the ending of something or other. It's like, fuck off. I don't care. So, but it's not for me anyway. Right. But same with the trigger warnings. It's out of our hands.
Okay.
Yeah. I had a weird experience with Demons Inc., where one of the reviewers had mentioned that the book had 90% graphic sex, and it's not there.
I asked for more, damn it.
There was.
I want that version.
Was that you? So, there was
no.
There was one scene. It was very mild, but I did, I had never considered that maybe this one scene had really set something off, and that's how they saw the book. So it was very bizarre.
Wow. Okay. Krystle?
Yeah, I think that's a space for them, and it is something that and people develop communities where it's like, okay, I trust such and such blogger's opinion, and so if they say that this is uncomfortable for them, I'll and that in itself is a tool, and sometimes it works against us if those spaces aren't necessarily on the same page as where we thought we went. But at the same time, like if that's what chased them away, then probably they weren't ever going to be our reader anyway. So it's just, what can we do?
Well, To this point, now, because you brought up such an interesting point. Like, well, because the thing is, the reader or the reviewer is interpreting your work, right?
Mhm.
What if they slap on, not necessarily a trigger warning, but let's say their review perhaps indicates, like, what Clayton said, like, his book, the reviewer had said it had 90% graphics text versus only one scene, which Clayton feels is mild, which means that it must be terrific. But even besides that, there's obviously a wrong interpretation, by the reader or the reviewer. Now, how would you all as authors feel that, is there, because sometimes it can harm a book. Like sometimes,
Mhm.
I'm going to pull this example from Goodreads. Like, a long time ago, there was this book called Curse of the Black, which is something and of course, this is YA related, which kind of got slapped on with the fact that the author was being racist, or, had racist views, even though the only thing that was being espoused in her book was that, the main character tries to understand what makes her country racist. And of course, there was a big whole brouhaha about this, and the book, maybe it helped book sales, maybe it did not. But what do you all think, as authors, like, when sometimes readers or viewers might put wrong content warnings or wrong trigger warnings or wrongly interpret your book, do you all feel that there should be a place where authors can actually push back or respond back saying like, hey, no, that's not right?
I would say that it's not really possible for someone to wrongly interpret something, because we've only done half the work. Our half is writing it, and we do everything we can to be as clear and concise in our message as possible. But the other half of the work is the reading it, and we cannot account for the life experience of each and every person that reads our books, and what media they're comparing us to, what they like, what they don't like, what they've been through, what they missed out on. And so we've only done half the job. The other half of the job is the reader, and that half will be different every single time. And howsoever they interpret our words is correct to them. And so there isn't this, there really isn't any room, in my opinion, for us to go and say, no, you're wrong, because I don't know what they've been through. I don't know what opinions they have about policing systems and drug abuse and any of the myriad of things that I wanted to talk about. Their opinion and their interpretation is informed by the same complex system of their life and their minds and their emotions as my attempt at expressing those things. And so that is the beauty of creative spaces, but it's also something we have to make peace with as creatives, that we don't get to assume that we are right. We did what we did, and it's over, and everything that happens after belongs to the readers.
Yeah. And Krystle makes a really good point. And I think as far as pushing back, I think that's a perfectly good way to completely incinerate your career.
Yeah.
If you're going to complain, go do it in private. Go yell
Yes.
at other authors.
Yes. Have some trusted friends where you can, pull out your own hair and scream and yell and and then write the next book.
Yep.
Michael, Holly, are you in agreement with what Krystle said and Clayton seconded?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're an author engaging in any kind of conversation where you're telling your reader that they're wrong is probably the worst thing that you could possibly do. In terms of people misinterpreting the work that you do, I'm kind of very on board with what Krystle said. I think our responsibility as writers is to never intentionally cause harm, and I don't think I know of a single writer who would ever intentionally cause harm to a person. But when we are going to
except
approach
maybe Michael.
Except for Michael, I didn't want to say, but we were all thinking it. It's just to approach those potentially harmful topics in a place that comes from knowledge, experience, understanding, empathy, so that you can do it in the right way and to the best of your ability. So yeah, I'm very much on board with Krystle there.
Perfect. Michael, I'm guessing so are you?
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, Krystle is totally right, and also totally wrong. Yeah, like, it's writers should never interact with readers. Generally always goes badly. But yes, everyone has their own interpretation, but at the same time, I'm sure you've read reviews of your books where you're like,
Yeah.
did you even fucking read the book? Like, did you
Yeah,
understand
or
any of it?
my
And
favorite.
you're like, well, they're not wrong. It's like, they're not wrong, but you know what? They're fucking
They're
wrong.
not- But my favorite genre of review is when they say everything that you did intentionally and then somehow imply that you've done this because you're a bumbling idiot. And then it's like, that's very good that you pointed those things out. Yes, in fact, I was trying to say exactly that thing that you just said. So it's a weird relationship, and it's hard not to internalize it, but it's a feature of this business that we're in.
But it must be infuriating, right? Because sometimes and I'm not talking about the reviews which where the readers interpreted it wrong way, and then they're just like they might be on the smaller side. But let's say if an influential reviewer, let's say if somebody like who's nowadays blowing up on YouTube, like one of those big people like Daniel Green or somebody like that, who not purposefully but just misunderstands your book, or even like I know there are certain reviewers on Goodreads who have vast followings, and they perhaps pick up on a problematic aspect of your book, so as to speak, like the for fact that Holly mentioned, like her book did not has any mention of rape or anything like that, but yet the word is utilized because that is historically accurate, and then they kind of create a spectacle out of it. Would that be, in that scenario, would be permissible for the author to perhaps interact or at least put out something to kind of counterject that narrative?
How many
Yeah, I
books
gotta
did
admit,
this
I
have?
wouldn't. I wouldn't.
Yeah, neither would
wouldn't
I.
touch that.
Fortunately, I'm not popular enough to have been picked up by
Yeah.
someone that influential. So it's just not our space. It's not our place. It's not our, and I mean, let's be real, drama like that sells books. So
Yeah. There's what's the saying? There's no such thing as bad press. So
yep.
I think again, this comes down to the whole there being a wider conversation with readers. Authors absolutely should not engage, in these conversations, because it's just going to end terribly with, fire
Yeah.
and flames and blood and tears. But actually, readers can engage in those conversations. Other
Yeah.
reviewers can engage in those conversations. At this point, we should be stepping back.
Yeah.
Fair point. All right. Switching up to kind of like the last thing that I had to ask you all, because trigger warnings, of course, are such a controversial topic, or at least not really welcome in the space of grimdark or dark fantasy. What do you all think? What would be some good alternatives to that? I know Krystle mentioned content warnings, but even thinking more broadly, is it something, because I know the whole concept of film content warnings or film ratings are flawed. They're still utilized, but they're flawed. Since you're also, all are such brilliant authors, can you all try to think of some alternatives to maybe a trigger warning, like a content warning, like a mark, or something to do with like the design of the book, even like the cover design, to kind of indicate that this is more darker and that this is.
It says Clayton Snyder on it.
See,
you just get a little CS stamp and
made Fletcher flinch.
I think we should have like a sliding scale with Clayton's face on it that just gets like higher and higher.
like the pain scale. There we go.
Yeah, or Scoville units or something. Although that's a romance thing, so maybe that would give the wrong message. But actually, romance is really good at that. I don't understand it, but a romance reader can identify subgenre and heat level and all kinds of things just on the cover. Nothing but the front cover of the title, because romance as a genre has nailed down this trend that people follow. Oh, sir. I love you. I don't piss off the romance readers, but I totally forgot. But the colors that they use on
Mhm.
the title will tell you, I don't know, like this is paranormal, and the whether or not they show two characters or one will like, and it's also coded, and the readers in the genre have figured it out, and the authors have used it brilliantly. But I feel like fantasy writers as a rule are kind of chaotic and hard to um,
What?
control, or we have a tendency to kind of thumb our noses at the way things are done, so maybe that wouldn't work for us. But it's an interesting thought where there's potential there to be able to try to signal certain things. I don't know what
I love
the
the
code
idea
would be.
of the Clayton Snyder scale, just Clayton's face grimacing more and more, like that's that way would. But no, but on a more serious level, what else do you think can be done just to kind of indicate, that this is perhaps a darker work of fiction, or like it explores some really unsafe spaces, so as to speak.
I don't know that it should be. They did this with comics back in the 50s. They dropped the Comics Authority seal on everything. And it was to let people know that this was approved in content, and this was okay, and it was all American and that sort of thing. And it really got a lot of backlash from the creators and the artists, and people really inside the industry really disliked this policing of tone and content and story, because it didn't allow them to actually exercise their creative muscles anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's a great idea that we do something like that.
There's the chaoticness of it all. Holly and Michael, any thoughts?
I just write fantasy books. I don't get it.
Yeah, they're just so happy. There's going to be a unicorn in the next one, I hear.
There is.
It will be eaten by 16 people. And its horn will be used to murder somebody.
I swear to God, we're all just writing notes down as we're talking, and yeah, that's going in the next one. So,
Yeah.
Krystle's laughing because it's true. I mean, in terms of me forgetting what the question was, I've forgotten what the question was.
Sorry, it was basically just me asking, like, can there be a better way than trigger warnings, like some content warning or some scale, like Krystle mentioned, or something like that, like, what, or like the cover design could indicate, like she mentioned with romance, that how they're kind of indicating, like, if the person if the lettering is colored a certain way, that indicates this, or if there are two males, and it might indicate like a reverse harem or something like that.
I mean, honestly, I don't really think there needs to be anything else other than, content warnings or trigger warnings, whichever, authors want to use. I don't think it's a great use, or I want to try and make sure that I say this in the right way. I don't think this is the battle to be fighting necessarily. I think the battle to be fighting is to make the information, make the resources, make the conversations accessible, so that people, and especially writers, can talk about these themes and these topics, so that they can do a better job. I think that's where, for me, I want to put most of my energy into. I'm happy to put a content warning on my website, or I may put one in a book in the future. I'm not against changing my stance in any way, but it will be a case of putting a content warning in and saying, this book contains violence and death and whatever else I feel appropriate. Then I'm going to go and spend my time trying to make myself better at presenting those things.
Yeah. I think we are almost there, though, with the covers starting to indicate, because, like, I mean, I can see Fletcher's cover behind him. I think that's an End to Sorrow. That cover is not speaking to fluff. Yeah. So I think we are there. We're coming to a place where our covers are doing a lot of work for us. and then also our own marketing does a lot of that work too. Like Holly said earlier, that the way we talk about our books is informing the way other people are talking about our books, and it's just
by being a bunch of drunken reprobates on Twitter, we are helping people decide whether or not we are the kind of drunken reprobates that they should be reading.
Right.
it's working.
And if they're like, he said fuck in that tweet, and I don't like that, then they know not to get it.
Yeah, it's true. There's a certain amount of how we present ourselves that's going to prepare people for the fact that we might drop a few F-bombs or something.
Ew, that's like 3/4 of my timeline.
I'm kind of worried if people were just, having problems with the F word, and especially if they're still wanting to go in and read grimdark or dark fantasy, because that would be super problematic.
That is definitely a case of our audience self-selecting and self-rejecting, and that ideally is something that we want. Like who was it recently? Was it McClung? No, it couldn't have been McClung. Somebody got a weird review saying that there were too many F words, and it's like he looked through and it's just like, if that's what you're going to take issue with, then time to find a different circle of authors.
Maybe read some YA stuff, or Brandon Sanderson, Michael Fletcher's favorite author.
Brandon Santo.
He famously does not curse in his books. His books do not have any cursing, and even if the cursing is there, it's kind of creative for that world which he has written in, and even then, it's on the very milder side.
Darn.
I can't relate.
All right. Sorry, before I'll let you all go, I just have maybe a couple of quick fun questions, again, with the theme of trigger warnings. And this is a question, again, open for all of you, basically, about which book that you had read in the past that you think needed to have a trigger warning, or, you felt that it seriously should have had a trigger warning.
I read, veteran memoirs, and I read Dennis Lehane, who's quite famously a pretty gritty crime novelist, and I read Mr. Fletcher, and I read Ms. Tinsley and Mr. Snyder, and it's like all of my reading could have trigger warnings, but I go there on purpose. So I feel like we undersell ourselves sometimes, where we think about trigger warnings as a warning away, but there's a huge audience for people who like that. Like I always feel like, as fantasy authors, we're nowhere close to what people are doing over in fiction. Like there's some wild shit going on the literary fiction shelf. So we're fine. It can also be a celebration of the depravity that we enjoy so thoroughly.
Krystle, I love your positive spin on this. I really do.
So I've never read a fantasy novel or science fiction novel that to me required, just personally, a trigger warning at all. But I read a lot of history because I like that. I want to get out of the genre, and I find there's a lot of stuff in history to take it influences from, and that shit is dark. I have never read a fantasy novel as dark as just reading history. Regular human history. As it's like trigger warnings. History's bad. People are shitty. But even then, that stuff, it's real. Still don't need a trigger warning for it. But again, that's just me.
Clayton, Holly.
Pretty much the same for me.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys are making it so easy for me. Clayton, not even for the famous Steve Donald, the Thomas Convent book number 1. You wouldn't say that needed a trigger warning?
Well, I kind of blame my librarian. I was like 12 when I read it.
Really?
Yeah.
He let you read that when you're 12?
Yeah, she was an interesting person.
Sorry. Oh, okay. Okay. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, lastly, before we can bring an end to this wonderful, fascinating discussion, where can our viewers find you all online?
on Twitter, being idiots.
What are your handles, or are there
Oh,
websites?
that's a good question. I'm just at Krystle Matar on Twitter, and that's where I'm most inappropriate. So that's the fun one.
At Clayton Snyder too. Same place.
Every now and then we accidentally tag the other Clayton Snyder.
Oh, don't do that.
Poor guy.
I don't even know him, and he's the worst.
At Fletcher MR on Twitter, michaelrfletcher.com is a website which has not been updated in a while.
And Holly, what about you?
Yeah, Twitter. So it's at Dirk Ashton. If you want to ask follow-up questions about this podcast and my stance and trigger warnings, you can tweet me at Dirk Ashton. I'm gonna live to regret that, aren't I? Yeah, no, it's at Holly Tinsley. You can find me on there.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I will be linking all of your Twitter accounts and your websites, and especially since everybody's books are being written by the famous Dirk Ashton, I'll be linking him for all follow-up questions, like Holly suggested, at Dirk. I wanted to thank you, all four of you, for taking the time to talk to me and about bearing with me with all these boring questions, especially with all your time zones as well. I look forward to all of your books in the future, and so thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Bye, everyone.